Alright, so still working on this guitar here. I know. Alright. I have glued all the kerfing back on using a lot of big clamps like this and a lot of little ones. And a lot of patience. So what I did is I went through and cleaned up this entire little section to make sure there was no residue from glue, residue from the kerfing before I took it off, or before it fell off, more accurately. And then I also went through and cleaned up the edges of the binding so that they'd be flush. One thing I did go back and do after I turned the camera off was, I believe it was right about here, I had taken one of my clamps and clamped a little block of wood, and I had the clamp, the heavy end right here, and it bowed the wall, the side wall of the guitar out. So what I had to do is I had to take a hot knife, pull the kerfing off, flip the clamp around, and then also put some weight to prop it and bend it back so that it's more square. So what I'm doing here is just trial fitting, and just as I was hoping, it fits like a glove. And then I check, make sure the back is flush to the binding all the way around, or as close as we're going to reasonably get. And then pop it back off. This glue cup is getting very sticky, so I'm going to add a little support around it. Going through a copious amount of fish glue in this project. So now what I'm going to do is go right here and line this with glue. So one thing I did is I went to the hardware store and I had some dowel lying around, and what I did is I made my own little homemade spool clamps. So the masking tape right here is to protect the finish on the side of the guitar from the threads, and the cork I very roughly cut off of some scrap cork board I had, and I just sawed the dowel rod, drilled a hole through it, put this 5/16 rod with a washer and a wing nut, and then I'm going to use this to clamp the top onto the guitar. Last time I put the top back onto a guitar, I did not have spool clamps. In fact, I didn't have enough clamps, and so there were some areas where the guitar, the back of the guitar was sticking up. Luckily, it was a cheap guitar. It wasn't anything to be too upset about, but it was an important lesson. And it's always good to have enough clamps. Alright. I've made sure my tail block and my block have been resecured. Luckily, these two bars, this is very similar in construction to an arch top, which I guess it is an arch top, but these two bars, luckily, are still where they should be. I touched up a little glue at the ends just to make sure they didn't wander. The purpose of leaving the binding on was to kind of use, it was actually an idea I got from Pete at Driftwood. I asked him about doing this, and he suggested leaving the binding on to kind of act as a fence for the top. That way the top fits nice and snug in between the binding. About, I'd say 80% of the binding is still attached to the side. Some of it's kind of wandered off, both before I started this project and as I was taking the top off. That I'm not too concerned about.
Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?